Okay, I think that we are live. So thanks everybody who's joining us live tonight. My name is Liz Eggleston and I run Course Report, which is a resource to choose the coding bootcamp that's right for you. So I'll give you my plug now so we don't have to talk about it again. Check out Course Report, use our directory of coding bootcamps. You can read reviews from alumni, find student and instructor spotlights on our blog, and particularly relevant to this webinar is that we have a field on each school page that lists all of the finance options, the financing options for each school. So literally everything that you need. So tonight's webinar is going to be a little bit different if you've tuned into past webinars. In that I will be speaking significantly more than usual. So our goal here is to introduce you to all of the ways that I and we have seen students pay for their boot camps over the last couple years. So I'm going to try to give as many examples as I can, places to start your research, and we're going to attempt to back all of that up with data and good examples and good stuff like that. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute and show those slides so that you can actually follow along. And I also have two really amazing guests today who each have a really unique experience in the bootcamp world. So I'll introduce them now, and then they're going to jump in throughout the webinar. So Shannon Burns is a graduate of HackBright Academy, which is an all-female coding bootcamp in San Francisco, and she now works as a developer advocate for NGINX. And she used almost every method that we're going to talk about today to cover her HackBright expenses. But one of the most interesting ones was that Shannon actually led a successful crowdfunding campaign to cover her tuition. So she has a really amazing perspective. She's going to take us through that. And then Xander Raphael is going to come in to give us, come in really handy during the second half of this webinar when we talk about external loans and lending platforms for alternative education. He is a wonderful expert on this. Xander is the founder of Climb Credit, which partners with high-quality boot camps to provide loans for boot camp students. I've never taken out a loan for a boot camp, so I have tons of questions. And if you have questions too, then be sure to ask. It looks like people are trickling in, and so I want to remind everyone to use the Q&A app to participate tonight. You can also tweet at us or comment on Google Plus or on our Facebook. I promise that I will find all of your comments and questions and feed them to our panel. So you can ask me, Shannon, Xander, any questions between the three of us. I think that we can answer anything or find the answer. So also, if you've been to a boot camp and you're tuning in and you have tips for future students, please feel free to weigh in. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the deck and follow along. So before we start talking about how to pay for a boot camp, let's all get on the same page. Oh, this is me, Xander, and Shannon, all of our emails and Twitter information, so ways to get in touch with us. So before we talk about how to pay for a boot camp, I want to get on the same page about what a boot camp costs. So we're going to look at the current landscape of boot camp educations right now. So the average price of a boot camp in the United States is about $11,000 for about 11 weeks of instruction. Within that, there's quite a range of tuitions. So there are free boot camps. It goes up to $21,000 for a 6-month boot camp. So the $3,400 one is the lowest priced actually like paid boot camp in the US, I think, which is Epicodus. And then $21,000 is on the higher end. That's Galvanize, which is a 6-month boot camp in Denver. And there are some free boot camps as well, which we'll dive into in a minute. So I hear the question all the time, is a boot camp worth it? So in our research, we see a 44% increase in salary, which is like a $25,000 lift in salary. So if you think about that $11,000 tuition, it is more than covered for most people by that salary lift. So the average boot camp is $11,000, but let's look into what really goes into that total boot camp cost. So when we think about that, we want to think about 4 things. So there's upfront costs, tuition, laptop, books, cost of living, if you're going to relocate for a boot camp, what you're paying in rent, food, opportunity costs, salary lost while you're at a boot camp, if you had a job before, benefits that you lose if you quit your job, things like that. And then financing costs like interest on a loan. So those are things to think about when you're calculating your full cost of tuition. Shannon, is there anything else that I'm missing here? What was your total cost all in?
So after my calculations, once I graduated, I estimated with a 1-month buffer after school ended. Did not calculate financing costs, and the total with the $15,000 tuition at Hackbright ended up coming up to closer to 45 grand, just with the cost of rent in San Francisco and losing my salary and everything. So it's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's with the opportunity cost sort of built into that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that I'm missing in terms of upfront cost? Tuition is probably the highest there, and maybe rent is sort of the highest, but anything other than laptop?
Transportation.
Okay.
But no, I think you got most of it.
Okay, cool. So that's sort of your total cost to think about. And then you want to calculate your ROI. You should be calculating your return on investment for any big decision that you make. Will the coding bootcamp, the cost of that bootcamp, pay off in the long run? So Xander, Climb does lending for students for high ROI education, which I really like that term. Why do coding bootcamps fall into that category of high ROI education?
Good question. So for most people, it's exactly what you laid out. It's that if and can you hear me all right, by the way?
Yeah.
For most people, it's exactly what you laid out. You take in all the costs associated with it, and if you view education like an investment, it has a cost or a collection of costs and a return. It just so happens that in the case of education, the cost is called tuition and the return is called salary, but it's an investment like any other. And so when you factor in all these costs at good programs, if you work hard and are able to find employment, you come out ahead. You effectively have a positive return on your investment in your education. But one thing to remember is, and you shared the average tuition increase, it's important to think about what you were earning before. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes we'll have applicants who come through our system who had a very high-paying job previously and choose to get a position in or choose to go through an academy, a boot camp, and pop out the other end and enter as a junior engineer somewhere and earn the same amount of money as they did before because they were already earning a lot. And they may be happier, they may be more excited, their sort of lifetime earnings may be higher because as an engineer they're better positioned to grow, but they may not feel the bump right away. So it's just important to think about where you are and what your goals are.
Yeah, I think that is really important, thinking about the lifetime. If you're happier in your job, if this is the job that's right for you, then your lifetime, salary is probably gonna be higher. You're gonna stay in it longer. That's really smart. So when we think about ROI, there are some ROI calculators out there. Feel free to use those. I'm sure if you Google ROI calculator for a bootcamp, you'll find a ton of things. We have a worksheet on the Course Report blog, but ROI is a pretty simple calculation. If you're paying attention to the last slide, then you already know how to calculate your cost. Now you sort of have to think about your gains, like Xander was talking about. The average bootcamp student sees a salary increase of $25,000, but that depends on so many factors. So some things you should be asking the bootcamp about, other things you need to ask yourself. So in this slide, we've got what to ask the bootcamp. Ask about average starting salary. Ask about the time it takes to actually get a job. Shannon, how long did it take you to get your first job when you graduated from Hackbright?
I was really lucky. It took me about a month, but I know that the average is more close to about 6 months. So those statistics are really hard to find. A lot of schools don't seem to want to give those away, but really press on it if you can and talk to other students. And I think that depends too on things like your network and do you have a network coming in? Do you have a network coming out? and how much support is there to actually help you find a job rather than just teach you.
Yeah. Xander also brought something up really important before we started, which is to ask about the distribution of outcomes. Xander, will you explain that distribution of outcomes and why like the mean or the average starting salary might not be the perfect metric to look at?
Sure. I mean, to make it really simple, if half the people find no employment and the other half of the people all get jobs paying $150,000, the average salary from that school will be $75,000. And you may look at that and say, well, that's wonderful. I'd love to earn $75,000. But 50% chance you're going to earn nothing, in my crazy example. So it's important to think about, what share of the graduates find work in the first 3 months, in the first 6 months, in the first year, in field, because many schools will say that, yes, they find work, but it turns out they're working as a barista. And yes, they're employed, but they're not employed as a developer, which is what you went to the school to find. So you should really push schools on it, because there have been dozens and dozens of schools that have opened up in the past years, and and some of them are not going to be as good as others. And you yourself need to, even if you're accepted to one of these schools, that's not the end of it. You're going to have to work very, very hard for the portion of time you're in school to find that work afterwards.
Yeah, I think so. So those are things to ask the bootcamp. Other things to ask are about like partial tuition refunds from the school. If you like accept a job with a certain hiring partner, there can be tuition refunds from that. If the school has a job guarantee, really getting into like the nitty-gritty of what that job guarantee means. If you are, if you get a job after 6 months, or if it takes you a certain amount of time, like when that guarantee sort of kicks in. So those are things to ask the bootcamp. Then you also have to sort of do some research yourself. So obviously look at market demands, look on Indeed, what do junior developer roles in your city actually pay? You hear a lot of like $100,000 starting salaries after a bootcamp. It depends on where you're going to live and the actual job that you're going to get. So definitely look on sites like that, and then think about your employability. So Xander was talking about depending on the job that you had before you went to a boot camp, that can really like sort of affect what you do afterwards and affect like your actual ROI. But think about that also in terms of what your other skills are because of your past. So if you've worked in one programming language and you take a boot camp to skill up into another language, then you're probably not going to be looking for a junior developer role. Your salary may be higher. If you were like a product manager before, you may have additional skills that an employer would pay a premium for. And then on the other hand, if you had zero technical experience before, you're probably going to be looking for a more junior developer job. So Shannon, oh yeah, go ahead.
I thought I'd jump in there and just mention that not just technical related positions can have transferable skills. So my background was absolutely not technical, and being able to take that alternative background into a technical role has been incredibly helpful. So just start to think creatively about what you've done and how that can apply to your future.
Shannon, what did you do before you went to Hackbright?
I did a lot of very weird things. So let's see, immediately before Hackbright, I worked at Lyft as an account executive for a short while, and that was when I got accepted to Hackbright, and so I left to go to school. But before that, I was working as an event planner for a nonprofit and had kind of just done a lot of odd jobs. I was a server for a while, and I was a makeup artist as well, so kind of a little bit of everything.
No, it's just, yeah, it's great to know. And we have a great student spotlight with Shannon from a while ago, early on in Course Report's existence, but it's awesome, yeah. She has a really interesting background. So Shannon, one other thing is that you and I had talked about this before, was that you had read a comparison between like learning to code on your own versus a boot camp versus a CS degree before you decided to do Hackbright. And that's an important thought process to go through, and I think something that a lot of people are sort of thinking about. How did you figure out, while we're talking about ROI and like making that decision, how did you figure out that a boot camp was the best option for you?
So for me, I had to become very self-aware of how I learned best, and I was concerned about the longevity of my career. And so I know that I learn best in a classroom environment. And so for me, I was learning on my own, and I just felt like I needed an extra push to have somebody to ask questions to, and to have that in-person experience. And so when I looked at, once I had realized I needed a little bit more, I looked into a CS degree program or a boot camp. And the boot camps at that point were fairly new and kind of risky. And didn't have there were no lending opportunities at all, but I had already had a bachelor's. I knew the cost of an education for a second bachelor's was going to be incredibly expensive, because your tuition is higher the second time around. And I knew from talking to people coming out of schools in CS degree programs and in coding boot camps that it seemed to me like the people were out of boot camps were having much higher success rates than people that were coming right out of school. In terms of finding jobs at the companies I wanted to work for.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely look into that, but that's totally different now. It's been so long.
Yeah, it's also clearly like a very personal process that you have to go through, but it's good to hear your perspective. Okay, so it looks like some more people are trickling in, so I just want to remind everyone to use that Q&A app to participate. So you can tweet at us, you can comment on Google+, on Facebook, or you can use the Q&A app in Google Hangouts to ask questions of Xander and Shannon. Okay, so now we are all on the same page about the cost of a boot camp and how to calculate your ROI.
Point to that. Sorry to interrupt.
Of course.
You have every right as a student to ask the school to speak with some alumni. And if they don't provide you any alumni, that means that they don't have anyone like Shannon who's pleased with the outcome. And that tells you something, and you should try to find another school. Most likely they'll provide someone to you, and you can ask that person, how did their peers do? Did other people in their class find work? What were their problems? And you'll get a straight answer from someone.
Absolutely. The other thing is that I've noticed that anybody who goes to a boot camp puts the boot camp in their education field on LinkedIn. So do that very simple search, and you will find people who have graduated from the boot camp that you're looking at. And reach out to them and get coffee and ask all of the questions. I
would urge you, to reach out yourself rather than through a school, because sometimes if people do reach out with a school, or if you go ahead and ask your school and get that perspective, but then also do your own research, because sometimes they'll just provide you the people that they know really like their school and their program.
Smart. Okay, so you have a lot of avenues to find those alumni. Okay, so 7 ways to fund a boot camp. This is sort of the fun stuff. And this is from things that we've seen in the past and things that have worked for people. So this is also sort of assuming that you've already considered savings, personal loans from families. We're going to go over some sort of creative or interesting ways to cover your remaining tuition. So the first way is scholarships. So scholarships, first of all, think about scholarships versus fellowships. You'll see both. So scholarships are discounts off of tuition. Fellowships are a little bit different. A couple of examples of fellowships right now are the Opportunity Fund at General Assembly and the NYC Fellowship at Flatiron School. Those are 2 fellowships that cover all or almost all of tuition, but they also have specific requirements, whether that's like residency in the city or current salary, race, gender, some requirements after you graduate in the community and things like that. You can also look for school scholarships. So those can be merit-based or needs-based discounts, as well as scholarships specifically for women and underrepresented minorities. You'll see a lot of those. A couple to look into right now that are interesting are Turing School in Denver has a new $4,000 scholarship for underrepresented groups, and Metis is a data science boot camp in New York that has $2,000 scholarships for women and underrepresented minorities. But at any boot camp, you'll usually find at least a $500 scholarship for women and underrepresented minorities. And some of those can be unadvertised, so always ask the boot camp. There may be something that you're not seeing on their website. One other interesting thing that I just want to point out is VA benefits and the GI Bill. So this year we saw the first boot camp get VA approval for students to use the GI Bill, and that was Skill Distillery, which is in Denver. It's important to note, so Skill Distillery is a Java bootcamp, but it's an arm of a training company that's been around for like 20 years, which is important to note in terms of like getting approval for VA training. But we are seeing those VA benefits sort of seep into the bootcamp world, which is really interesting. And then a pro tip, Course Report has a lot of scholarships from $500 to $2,000, so don't leave that money on the table. Shannon, did you get a scholarship when you went to Hackbright?
I did. I got a partial scholarship.
Okay, cool.
From Hackbright.
Okay, so scholarship, check. Then free boot camps are worth mentioning. So we'll take a second and talk about a few free quote-unquote boot camps that have figured out ways to sort of educate students without an upfront cost to them. And those are going to be a little bit more competitive in terms of admissions, or they can be, but obviously a really good way to save money on tuition. So a couple examples that I'll just go through really quickly. Ada Developers Academy is women only, and it's in Seattle. Code for Progress is a one-year-long fellowship in DC that's specifically geared towards people who want to use their coding skills for social justice. And both Ada Developers Academy and Code for Progress have a bootcamp component and a structured internship or like apprenticeship component. So those are really interesting. Then Recurse Center, which was formerly Hacker School, does not consider themselves to be a coding bootcamp technically, but it's free, self-directed, educational retreat for people who want to get better at programming. And then Founders and Coders is in the UK, and it is free because courses are peer-led and project-based, so students will like take turns doing seminars, running code reviews, managing projects. So both Recurse Center and Founders and Coders are really community-driven and also free. And then Insight Data Science is really interesting. They're in New York, and they're one of the, they're a fellowship for PhD students who are looking to make the transition out of academia and into data science, and that's also free for the student. So those are, you know, sort of wild cards, not going to work for everyone, but definitely like look into them if they make sense for you, if you qualify for them. So this is a really interesting topic, which is employer sponsorship. This is where we start to get a little bit more creative. So you may be doing a boot camp. Like obviously people do boot camps for a lot of different reasons. A lot of people are career changers. They're in one career and they want to get in, you know, break into tech. But you may be like a promotion seeker. So promotion seekers are super motivated, super driven. They might be happy at their current company, but they want to move into a technical role. And oftentimes, your employer might have a pool of money that's reserved for upskilling or training. Or maybe you have like education benefits in your current role, and that can be the perfect time to pitch your boss on covering your coding boot camp. So we have a cheat sheet on the Course Report blog about how to convince your boss to pay for a boot camp, but I'm going to give just like a tiny rundown and some tips and tricks. And I have a story from Seth, who I was talking to last week. So tip number one, list the benefits. So list the ways that your company is going to benefit from your new coding skills, which means soft skills like being able to communicate effectively with developers, and you should also be presenting to your boss exactly how much money they're going to be saving, like if you're going to be able to generate new revenue with your new coding skills, or if it would actually be cheaper to train you than to hire a completely new developer. Those are things to think about. Tip number two is to anticipate compromise. So some boot camps are part-time, others are full-time. You might need to offer to take like a night or weekend class or an online part-time class if they can't, I mean, the ideal situation is that you walk out with like full pay and benefits to quit, take 3 months off and do a whole boot camp, but you may need to compromise there. And then the last tip for now is to help your employer find the money. So budgets are obviously tight. Boot camps are very expensive. We've figured that out. So help your boss out if you know about like a pool of money that's dedicated to continuing education. You can also, companies can get like tax breaks for footing the bill for education. There are like subsidies for education and at the city and state level. So do your research before you pitch it. And then I was actually talking to a graduate of Block, which is an online boot camp. His name was Seth this week, and he was going to join us, but he couldn't make it at the last minute. So I want to just share his story really quickly, just so you know what this option sort of looks like in the real world. So Seth was working at a company called Excella in professional services. He was doing long enterprise level projects, and he wanted to pursue web development. So he talked to his boss, and he actually eventually talked to his CEO, and his boss obviously like didn't want to lose him altogether, so they decided to move him into a new role called a developer evangelist, which is actually really similar, or maybe the same thing that Shannon does, which is amazing. I hear that role title all the time now. So in order to transition into that team, his boss agreed to pay for Block for the full stack development course. And the other cool thing was that because he was learning on the job, like obviously transitioning into a new role, he was actually able to do that Block class during work hours for the first couple months. So you don't necessarily need to quit your job and do a boot camp like full time if that doesn't work for your boss or for your employer, but you can sort of see if you can be flexible and learn while you keep your job. Shannon, did you ever think about, I feel like you and I talked about this, did you ever think about asking Lyft?
So I did actually ask Lyft, and so it's interesting because I don't know that we did talk about it before. They actually helped a lot. They donated a laptop to me, and they got really creative. So I told them that I had gotten accepted into this cool coding boot camp, and that I didn't know how I was going to pay for it, and that I wanted to come back after school. So they said, oh, great, I'd love to see how we can help, come up with a bunch of ideas. So I came up with a bunch of ideas. They donated a space to hold an event so that I could, as a fundraiser for tuition. It was very helpful. So it doesn't have to just be, can you, pay for this one thing with company dollars. There's other ways that you can get creative about it.
Absolutely. Okay, that's really good advice. So the next thing to think about is deferred payment. So there are some schools that only require a deposit up front, and then they generate revenue by taking a percentage of your first year's salary. So a couple examples of those are App Academy in San Francisco and New York. That's sort of the model for this deferred payment program. Viking Code School is a remote or it's online coding boot camp that was started by an App Academy graduate, Eric Troutman, who applied that App Academy model to his online school. And then Coding House in California just announced that they will be switching to this deferred payment model as well. So things to think about. Remember that those schools are like can be an incredible opportunity for people who can't afford that upfront cost. Remember that those schools are basically covering their costs when you get a job, so those incentives are like really aligned, which is awesome, but you should also expect a very rigorous course. So at App Academy, for example, you get tested very regularly. That attrition rate is going to be higher, so just think about that. And then you should also ask the school if they'd be willing to work out some kind of deal for deferred payments as well. I know in the past, Turing School and Telegraph Academy have both said that they would work with students to work out a payment plan or like a deposit plus deferred payment sort of plan for students.
Just remember
go ahead.
Just remember that with all of these, you do have to pay it back. So you're effectively taking out a loan. And so once you do that, just make sure you understand the terms of the loan, because I've known some schools to offer these payment plans, but they actually come with an embedded 16% interest. And
That's
so,
really interesting.
you know, make sure you review the documents very carefully, because you may be obligated to pay not only the tuition, but a lot of interest as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. So with deferred payment plans, make sure that you're like actually looking at those contracts and that the interest rates wouldn't be higher than taking out like a traditional or alternative loan. That's smart.
Those are important to factor into your calculations as well on ROI, and how long after school are they going to have you start paying, and does it wait until you find a job or not? Sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So, yay, so we're on crowdfunding. So first, meet Shannon. You already have. Shannon obviously went to Hackbright. She gave a little bit of background about what she was doing before she went to Hackbright. But I think one of the most, and she's also chimed in on a lot of these tips for covering tuition. So she used a lot of them, which is like an amazing perspective. But I think one of the most interesting ways that Shannon actually was able to pay for tuition was through a crowdfunding campaign, which we see a lot of now. So Shannon, will you just tell us, like, start basic, what is crowdfunding? What's the sort of, how is it set up?
Sure. So I have been doing, I thought about it actually the other day, and I've been doing crowdfunding since before crowdfunding was really a thing when I was a kid. And I essentially call it's asking other people for money, so that you can share the burden with the whole community, and achieve great things, hopefully. So when I had this awesome opportunity and had to come up with $15,000, and I had to come up with a deposit in I had a month to come up with $5,000. Mm-hmm. I realized that I needed to try everything I could, and I lost all of my shame and decided I was going to ask all of my friends to help me and all of their friends to help me. So I did a bunch of research on crowdfunding to pay for coding boot camps, and there were at the time only, I think, 3 or 4 other people that had tried to do it, and nobody had done it successfully. But I didn't give up.
Yeah, so I see, honestly, now, I see a lot of crowdfunding campaigns that have raised $0.
Yeah.
Why does crowdfunding not really work for a boot camp? Or why do we see a lot that aren't working?
So, I mean, I think you have to be honest with yourself about what you're asking of people. Mm-hmm. Nobody has a lot of money to throw around, regardless of, even if you make a 6-figure salary, your expenses go up. And so you're asking somebody to help you make more money than they might make, which can be a little absurd if you think about it. So I realized early on, after I had maybe raised $100 from friends and people that just care about me, and then I realized what I needed to do was do something that wasn't just going to help me, but was going to help my community. Because then people want to help. They want to help more than just one person. And so that was where I got the idea to start a scholarship foundation through the crowdfunding platform. So raise the cost of my own tuition and then donate 10% of my first year's salary back for another person to go.
That's really cool. And you called it, I love the name for it, Funding It Forward.
Oh, yeah.
It's really smart. Well, right, because crowdfunding relies on a reward for that investment, right?
Exactly.
So you have to be able to offer something at the end. And I think a lot of crowdfunding campaigns that I see these days, they're not offering anything at the end. So why was and how was hacking? So the scholarship was called Hacking for Women, right?
Yes.
How successful was it? Did it end up working?
Well, it's been an interesting journey. I kind of I think I was a bit naive when I started it, but it's been incredible, and we're still trying to figure it all out. So I realized that I needed to get nonprofit status, and that I wanted to be able to give a tax write-off to any of my people that were donating. And it takes about 2 years to get a nonprofit, a 501c3, which I didn't have, obviously. So I looked into fiscal sponsorship. So I partnered with another nonprofit and have now since merged my scholarship with Women Who Code. And right now I'm still in the phase of, I was expecting to be able to save 10% of my first year's salary. And unfortunately, with the high cost of, I ended up I did take out a private loan to pay for part of the deposit, so I'm paying that back. I deferred most of my tuition. I did get a scholarship, and then I used the funds that I raised to pay for rent. So I did kind of tick a lot of those boxes. And so I'm still trying to get to the point where it's viable to start actually launch and offer the scholarship, but we're just not quite there yet. It takes a lot longer than you might think, and so I definitely want to urge people to think about how much you're going to be paying back and how it's going to affect your future income.
Yeah. Which crowdfunding platform did you end up using?
I used GoFundMe.
Okay.
Because at the time, Kickstarter, and I think they still don't, Kickstarter does not allow you to fund for education, and Indiegogo took a higher percentage. But they do also take, I think it's between like 5 and 7% of everything you raise, depending on the platform, so maybe a little bit more.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, that the crowdfunding platforms do take a percentage off the top. Okay. Well, those are really good tips about that experience with crowdfunding. Do you suggest that people try it just to see what happens?
Absolutely.
Or
try everything you can.
Okay.
It's just, even if you're not able to fund everything through your crowdfunding campaign, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Ask for all the help that you can, and throw your, throw any concern you may have out the window. Just ask for help and be humble, and tell people what you want to tell, your story and what you want to do about it, and how you want to use what you're going to learn in the world, But I also think, make sure you're spending your time in a way that is going to provide the most return on your investment of your time. So if your crowdfunding campaign starts to become less effective, think about ways you can iterate on that and make it more effective. Or if you end up having more success in other ways, like throwing an event, then maybe that's a better use of your time.
Really good advice. Okay, so all of these options and ideas have been a lot of figuring out how to make that tuition and overall bootcamp price as manageable as possible. So now we're going to look at external loans, lending partners and platforms. And I want to there are a lot of options out there, so I just want to give a few. There's Climb Credit, which we have Xander here from Climb. There's a firm who just bought or acquired LendLayer, which is another loan platform. Earnest, Pave, Upstart, a couple smaller ones, Common Bond, and Finance Me, just so that everybody has all of the sort of information and all of the options. But I want Xander to now give us all of the information about external loans. So Xander, obviously founder of Climb Credit. Xander, why was Climb started?
So this was actually the third student lending business that our senior team had put together. And in all of them, we focused on what I described earlier, that education was an investment, cost being tuition, return being salary. And we saw a change in the U.S. education market, and boot camps are a prime example of this, but we see it in many different ways, where skills-based training was on the rise, where shorter-term skills or technical-based training cost less than a 4-year degree, took up less time, meaning you had to forego less salary, as Shannon was pointing out earlier, and got people jobs. And boot camps were a prime example of this. And at the time we started, no one was lending to them. So we got a foot in the door, and we now work with close to 40 schools across the country, where we've assessed, and by no means are we perfect. By no means is saying we work with a school guarantee that that school is going to get you a job. That's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is that those schools have met certain criteria, and usually are willing to participate in some way in the risk of the loans, meaning they're willing to put a bit of money where their mouth is, so that if you graduate and you're able to pay back your loans, they do better than if you don't.
Yeah. How many, okay, so you're working with 40 schools now. How many?
Just under.
Oh, just under, sorry. How many students have you
We've interacted with thousands of students. Not all of them we've offered loans to, but we've had thousands of applicants come through. Cool.
Okay, so take us through, I said this before, I'm a loan newbie.
Sure.
I've never taken out a loan for a boot camp, so I have a lot of questions. Okay, take us through what APR means, what terms, this term terms means in monthly payment.
Okay, so when you get your loan, most people think about interest, and they just think about their interest rate, and that's the headline number, and they're like, okay, what's the interest rate? I want to find the lowest interest rate, and that's the loan I choose. And that's part of it, but not all of it. So the first thing, and the most obvious one, is APR, which really just means the effective interest rate. So imagine that there are a bunch of fees associated with the loan. The APR is the equivalent interest rate to all those fees added in. It's a way to measure different loans that have different fee structures. And it just standardizes them and says, if the APR is 10 versus 10.5, the 10.5 one is more expensive per the amount of time you take it out. It may be that both headline interest rates are 10%, but one of them has some extra fees, which makes the effective interest rate 10.5. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does.
You can think of the APR as the total effective interest rate.
Okay.
Really simply.
Cool.
But now what's important is that's expressed across time. So if it's 10% a year, just to keep the number round, that means, and your loan is only for 1 year, that means you're only going to pay 10% over that year. Whereas if it's for 2 years, you're going to pay 10% over 2 years because you're borrowing the money for longer. The upside of having, and when people talk about the loan term, your second point, they're usually talking about how long the loan is. The benefit of having a longer loan, though, because right now you'd say, well, I should take a shorter loan term for sure because then I pay less interest over the life of the loan. That is true. You'll pay less interest. However, imagine a situation where you borrow your $10,000 for your coding bootcamp and you have 1 month to pay it back. So you have a loan term of only 1 month. That would mean that in the first month you had to pay back $10,000 plus 1 month of interest, which would be crazy. You wouldn't be able to afford it. The whole point of the loan was that you could pay it back over time. So similarly, if you take out a $10,000 loan and you only have 1 year to pay it back, your interest payments your payments per month are going to be almost $1,000. So which means that every month you're going to have to find $1,000. You're going to have to come up with it somehow. Otherwise, you'll be in default on your loan. It'll be bad. Your credit report will be very bad. So APR or interest rate alone isn't enough to look at. You should really be focused on your monthly payments. Because if I told you that this loan has an interest rate of 10,000%, however, you only had to pay $1 per month for a really, really, really long time, you might say that's a great deal because you'll always be able to come up with $1. It won't impact your life that month at all. You'll just not buy a chocolate bar. Can you even buy a chocolate bar for $1 anymore, actually? I don't know. But you might be able to, whatever you can buy for $1. The fact that you can't even buy a chocolate bar for $1 means that $1 is very easy to find. And that might be a much better loan for you than one where you had to pay $1,000 a month. So you should look at the APR as a way to check the effective interest rate. But what you're going to feel each month is the monthly payment. because that's what you're going to have to come up with. So make sure you check what that monthly payment is, because it may sound great that you have a really low interest rate and 1 year to pay it back. That means you're going to have to find $1,000 a month compared to a 3-year loan where you only have to find a couple hundred.
That's another reason to think about like what your salary goal is once you graduate, and what you are realistically going to be able to like see on your paycheck each.
But a very important thing is that for any student loan, there are no prepayment penalties.
Okay.
Which means that if you get a bonus, or you're making more money, or you're saving more, you can pay it off earlier. So in many ways, it's a good thing to take out the longest loan you can, because then you have to, the minimum you have to pay is the lowest per month. But if you want to pay more, you can.
Got it.
So if you find a loan that only asks you to pay $200 a month, and then lo and behold, you're doing great, and you have $500, you can pay it down sooner.
Okay, cool. That is really good advice. So we're on the same page with sort of the terms that we're talking about. Okay, so like I said, I've got a lot of questions, so I'm gonna get into sort of the nitty-gritty. So you work with just under 40 schools. How, and you sort of mentioned like what a good school does is like very open and has good outcomes, but how do you decide which schools to partner with in the first place?
So part of that's a secret sauce, but we evaluate their outcomes. We go and look at their alumni, we talk to alumni, we talk to hiring partners, we try to do surveys of all their graduates, we collect data from them. We get a picture of how people end up doing. Mm-hmm. And you see a broad range. We say no to a lot of schools. We say no to about a quarter of the schools we reach out to, and we don't even reach out to lots of other schools.
And when you say no to a school, is it generally because like they don't have the placement numbers threshold that you're looking at, or is it like you talk to a few alumni and hear like bad reviews, or all of the above?
I mean, there's more than one factor, but the main thing is we do not believe that consistently the school is going to graduate people who can find work.
Got it.
And high-paying work. Now, that doesn't mean that if we do work with a school, we guarantee that you're going to find work. And it doesn't mean that everyone will. We know some people won't. Mm-hmm.
So this next question is something that I get a lot of questions about, especially recently. So I want to pass it on to you. Is there a difference between the for-profit education debacle of like the Corinthian debacle and the trend of funding these boot camps? Why are they different?
Good question. So there are two parts to it. The first is that part of the reason that the Corinthian debacle exists is that, and the main reason it exists actually, is that the federal government will lend to every student at the same rate, whether they are studying computer science at MIT or a distance learning English literature program where they are a C student at Corinthian College. Those two students will both get a loan, no questions asked. And most people would think that the MIT straight A computer science student is more likely to find work and be able to pay back the loan than the C student at Corinthian. But the lender in this case doesn't differentiate between the two. And as a result, lots of people take out, and Corinthian costs almost as much as MIT. There's almost no price difference. So then you have a lot of people borrowing huge amounts of money and never getting work. Mm-hmm. So first, lenders have to be diligent and say we're not going to lend to, and say no to students, which is hard. But if we don't think that the school is going to help you get a job, or it costs way too much, if Corinthian only costs $5 or $500, it might be a great deal. We should all maybe be going. But if it costs $50,000, it's not a good deal.
Right.
So,
okay. Oh, go ahead.
So that's the first part. And the second part is partly on the schools. The schools need to continue producing good people. Otherwise, all the lenders will go out of business, too.
Yeah. No. So, okay, so it sounds like y'all are doing diligence on the after, making sure that students are going to be able to get a job afterwards. What if a student has like bad credit or no credit going into it? Does that affect how like Climb works? I wouldn't expect you to speak for all of the lending partners, but does that expect?
Yeah, so we do look at we look at various factors from your previous life, but everyone should apply. There's no cost to applying. So the worst case is you apply and you find out that we can't work with you. But you may as well apply. You may as well apply to a bunch of lenders because you'll get the best deal from someone. We're selling you something. We're selling you money today, and you should shop around for who's selling you the cheapest money or the most useful money. But yes, we do look at your credit history, how often you pay back other debts, all those things. However, the quality of your education is going to dramatically influence, the quality of the education you're receiving is going to dramatically influence our decision.
Okay, cool. So I think you really did a great job covering the interest rate versus monthly payment. And actually a lot of what this next question about what students should be considering when they're like doing that research. Are there people who should not be taking out a loan? Like, who is it best for?
It's a good question. I think at the end of the day, that's a decision. There aren't any type of people or people from a certain background or anything else that should or should not. What a loan allows you to do is smooth your consumption. Effectively, you can consume today from money you plan to earn in the future. So, if you want, you will have many motivations for borrowing money. What really is important is that you evaluate whether you think you'll be able to pay it back. So, remember how much you're going to have to pay each month. Don't just think about the interest rate. And draw up a budget and say, how much money do I have to earn after graduating to be able to afford this loan?
Yeah.
And if the answer is not enough, then the bootcamp's probably not a good idea for you, unless you can pay in cash.
So, okay, so I have a question from Liam, who's watching. So he says, if I do have savings, should I necessarily use that to pay for a bootcamp? Is there a scenario where I should still get a loan from Climb? If you have $30,000 in the bank, should you always use it? Yes, Shannon?
I just want to pop in and say that also take into account, it may be a good idea, just in my experience it was, to have that cash be for the living expenses that are going to come up, because that's a lot more liquid, right? And so even though it was more expensive in the long run for me to take out a loan, I would not have been able to have gone to school. I wouldn't have had rent to pay for. So just another thing to think about.
No, I think that's really important. Xander, does Climb or would Climb ever pay for cover living expenses or housing or?
So we will sometimes with specific schools. However, typically for most people that apply don't need to borrow. It wouldn't be wise for them to borrow the whole tuition amount and all their living expenses. So, if, as Shannon points out, if it's $45,000 in total expenses, we'll give you 10 of it, and we'll just happen to give you the 10 for tuition. That frees up 10 of some other money you were going to have to scrounge up to pay for the other stuff.
Right.
So to that person asking the question, it depends on your risk tolerance and your personal preferences. Remember, you can always prepay the loan. So if you have 10 grand in the bank, you can keep it in the bank and you'll pay 3 months of interest, which isn't much money, $150, $200, for the security of knowing that you get to keep all that cash. And then when you graduate and get a job, you can pay off the loan right away.
Right. Okay, so I've heard of some lenders paying the bootcamp directly, others pay the student, and then they are paying the bootcamp, the tuition. How does Climb work? And tell us about the risk sharing that you were talking about with the schools. What kind of risk does the school take on?
Yeah, so first on the distributions, we try to keep it simple. We lend money for tuition, so we send it directly to the school. You don't have to worry about it as a borrower. If you borrow $10,000, we'll just say, yes, you're good for it. We tell the school you're good for it, and you can show up in class.
Okay.
So it just saves the transaction costs and the nuisance of those multiple transfers. In terms of risk share, school, it varies by school. It's all, if there are any schools on the platform, call us and we can talk through how it would work. If there are any schools listening in. From a student's perspective, just know that if you've come to get a loan from Climb, it's a good thing. It means that the schools we're working with for our loans have said, yes, like, we accept that we're going to do better if the student's able to pay back his loan.
Got it. Okay, I just want to, I know that Xander has a hard stop, so I just want to get to our last option for paying for a boot camp, which is credit cards, which I've heard a lot on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Credit cards are loans.
Loans.
They are loans that charge, credit cards are loans. They are just loans that charge close to 20% interest.
Okay.
That's an important thing to remember.
My question was, well, yeah, like on the Dev Bootcamp blog, they say that a lot of, sometimes like a credit card can be that good option for some of their students. And my question for Xander was, when are credit cards a good option, and can they be?
Credit cards are a good option if you pay it off every month. If you're doing it because of the ease of online transaction or because you're wanting to collect the points and you have a bunch of savings and you can pay off your credit card, by all means. But carrying a credit card balance is a very inefficient way to carry debt because you're going to be charged a lot of interest. I mean, close to double the amount of interest that Climb charges, for example. So if you can get a lower interest loan, you should do it. At least for Climb, the application takes under 2 minutes. You'll get an answer the same day, typically maybe a couple days later. So may as well apply, and if you can get a much cheaper loan, great. If you don't have it and your credit card will lend you the money, you can use that as a backup, but the interest rate is going to be much, much higher, and the total amount you have to pay will be much, much higher.
Awesome. One of my questions was about how long it takes to actually like get approved or get an answer, and it sounds like that is pretty quick with Climb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that it takes longer is that some people apply and they have funny things in their history or in their application. So we actually have cases, this is just sort of funny, where people come in and they have an unpaid debt for a Best Buy credit card of $100 from 4 years ago. And you're like, hey, I'd love to give you this loan, but you owe Best Buy $100. And they're like, oh, I had no idea, like I didn't remember this. And they like call them and they pay the $100 and then they get a $10,000 loan the next day. So there are cases like that where we have to follow up and clear something up. Or they
take care of your debt, your library debts before you apply for your Climb.
It's not library cards, but yes, that's the sort of idea.
Amazing. Well, this was incredible, Xander. There's a ton of really great information from you. I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything that you want to, any tips, tricks, things that we did not cover that you want to give the audience before you have to sign off?
I think we've covered a lot of good stuff. The biggest thing I'd say to anyone thinking about it is it's not a surefire thing. It's not a magic bullet. You still have to work really hard. But if you're excited by the work, there are a lot of jobs out there. But you have to be excited by it. And you have to be a bit of a self-starter. You need to be able to graduate, and it's not like there will be 20 jobs just waiting for you. You're going to have to call people to find the work.
Absolutely.
And then finally, if you are looking at a school and Climb isn't working with them, ask if they can sign up with Climb, because then we can offer you even cheaper loans.
Yeah. Okay, wait, my last question for you, Xander, is do you have students who have now graduated and are like paying back their loans? Like, is Climb a good business? Are you happy with it?
Yeah, no, we have lots, nearly everyone is paying back the loans. Not everyone, but nearly everyone is paying back their loans, which is what we want.
Great. Sounds like a win-win. Okay, wonderful. Well, I know you have to hop off, so I just want to thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Shannon, anything that you want to say? One. Yes, good to see you.
Nice speaking with you, Shannon, briefly.
Nice to meet you.
Shannon, anything that you want to add before we wrap up? Anything that we didn't get to talk about? I think you are an incredible resource because you've done all of these things and you have like real experience with everything. So anything we didn't touch on?
We touched on a lot. We covered a lot. I would echo what he had just said about just be honest with yourself about what you want when you're considering a boot camp. Is it something that you have dedicated effort to, seeing if you enjoy it? Because it would be not a great idea to figure out all of your financing with all these different moving pieces and then go into a boot camp and realize that you hate coding. which people do sometimes. So be sure it's something that you enjoy doing because you actually enjoy doing it. Because to be honest, going through a boot camp is not worth it if you're just doing it for money. It's something you got to go and do because you like it.
Yeah, I think it's like a very delicate conversation that people are starting to have is about accessibility to these boot camps, and like the money is there now. There are proven results, and there are loans available if you can't necessarily afford it up front. But does that necessarily mean that you should be doing a coding boot camp? Maybe, maybe not. So I think that that's really good advice.
Also, if you're thinking about calculating your return on investment and you only end up being an engineer for 1 year, you're not going to see the lifetime of financial improvement from a boot camp that you would have calculated beforehand.
I totally agree. Okay, so wonderful. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thanks to Xander, who's already left. I've learned a ton. I hope that everybody who is tuning in learned something. I will post links to the video recording of this webinar on the Course Report blog, and I will also include contact information for Xander and for Klein. And tell us in the comments if you liked this webinar, what you want to see in our next live Q&A, and we will see you at the next one.